Hello and welcome to Between the T's, the knowledge sharing program with Texas Bank and Trust. I'm your host, Aaron May. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever heard this phrase or anything similar to it? Or maybe you've even said it yourself. It goes like this: after paying my bills, I don't have enough money to buy food. It's a sad statement I've heard many times. I've even said it myself. And if you've ever felt that way, just think about this, that you're not alone. According to a report from NPR.org, it indicates that more than half of Americans feel this way, especially during tight times that follow a job loss or financial crisis, or just due to the high cost of living that results from inflation in our economy. More specific statistics says that more than 30%, 1 in 3 Americans, live paycheck to paycheck. While low-income earners are most affected, the report also indicates that families making up to $200,000 a year have difficulty covering everything. Cost of livings play a big role in this. Ever since the year 2000, healthcare and college expenses have gone up more than 55%. Housing costs have risen more than 31%, while at the same time, wages have only gone up a meager 10% since the year 2000. Think about that, how drastically the shift has come in our economy just over the past 15 to 20 years. So we're going to speak more in depth into this topic, and to join me again for our conversation is my co-host, Blake Bradshaw. Blake, how are you doing today?
Hey, doing great. Thank you.
Good. Well, welcome to the program. And we also have with us again, Rachelle Carter. Rachelle, how are you today?
Doing well today. Thank you.
Great. So let's get into this discussion. Have you ever experienced this in your own lives or known people who've gone through this type of tight moment where it's like, they have a steady income, but their bills just overwhelm them to where they feel completely out of balance and have no hope?
Yeah, I find myself in this place, different stages in my life when things have happened and there's changes that need to be made.
Yeah.
And I was going to agree with Blake at different points in life, depending on the stage of life that I found myself in. I found myself in this predicament where you can have what seems like an excess in one season and then see that excess dry up in another season, much to what you just talked about, where the economy changes, things that you don't see coming down the road that will suddenly put a kink in what you thought was a good plan.
Absolutely. That's one of the things here in Texas. It's oil country. A lot of people here in Texas, their lives kind of go through these ebbs and flows, especially if you work in the oil field or are invested in the oil field in any way. You have moments where, like, you just look down the road and you see a whole bunch of new RVs and a whole bunch of new side-by-sides coming in. You can tell, man, the oil field must be good right now. And then just 6 months or a year later, all of a sudden you see a lot of for sale signs on Facebook Marketplace and stuff like that, where all of these RVs that people had just bought when times were good, they're now trying to sell because times got tight. And a lot of that comes through mismanagement of priorities. So what do we do when we face a moment where we have too many bills and not enough money? Last time we talked, we discussed this idea from the idea of an emergency. What do we do in a financial crisis? And we have to cut things to stop the bleeding, to make sure that we can survive through a unexpected event. But let's look at it today from the vantage point of just mismanaged priorities, overspending, or facing an overwhelming debt load. What do we do in that situation?
Yeah, so we're kind of attacking the maybe the expense column. There's two things. Not enough money could be one of the reasons. Maybe you're working part-time, but you're available to work full-time, right? Or maybe your certain skill sets could afford making more money. But when we look at the expense side, it's time to put, like you said in a previous episode, that pen to paper.
Yeah.
And look, where is that money going?
Absolutely.
I was going to say another thing that I think happens to people is they have things that are, we've talked about fixed and variable expenses. And so if you're not accounting for the fluctuation in your variable expenses, that can be a big torpedo to where your income, for the most part, is going to be pretty stagnant. It's going to be the same, but your expenses, they fluctuate so that you're not accounting for that.
Absolutely.
And that kind of throws a torpedo in it.
Absolutely. I know for myself, one of the things that I think happened in my personal financial journey was saying this very sentence. I know there was times out of college, just starting my career, I had car payments, I had student loans, I had credit cards, had a new rent in an apartment I was in, and all this stuff. Then when you lose a job, the income is gone, but the bills are still there. And so then you work hard, you try and find another job, like driving around. I had to use my credit card just to put gas in my car to drive and look for work. Then when I finally found a job, it made less than the job that I had lost. And so now I finally do have an income source, but I'm shoveling a big debt load with a smaller shovel. I'm like, what do I do now? I'm still working my tail off, but after paying all of my bills, I had like $20 left to my name, for a 2-week period. I mean, that's half a tank of gas and dollar menus, and ramen. That's really all you could have, all you could afford. It wasn't until I really understood, someone introduced to me how to manage my money and how to manage my finances properly, which is what we're trying to do with this podcast series, that if the light bulb came on and I started realizing that when I do my budget on paper before the month begins, it made so much more sense to me that I could actually see where I was actually spending money without thinking about it. And yes, it was a challenge. It was one of the most difficult things I ever did in my life. But looking where I was to where I came, I wouldn't go back. It changed my life that much. And I think one of the biggest things that we have to think about during this type of situation is, everybody who's listening to this program, keep in mind that your financial situation is different than mine. So I know for me, one of the things that really helped was first understanding what it is that caused my financial imbalance. So Blake, Rachelle, what do you guys think are some of the common things that people may be experiencing that bring them to a place of imbalance in their lives?
Well, right now I'm dealing with an imbalance, and that's a third child.
Yeah.
And so,
congratulations on that.
Yeah, thank you. And so, though it's exciting, the expenses, like you mentioned, it just increase so much.
Yeah.
And when you're buying 3 boxes of diapers, every month, that expense increases, food, the medical expenses, all of those things. And so you just kind of you can plan so much. But then it's not until you experience those expenses that you're like, okay, well, this is actually what it's going to cost, right? Or we just had a health emergency, and so you kind of take it as life comes at you. And so there's those life changes, natural disasters that also create an imbalance with the recent storms that came through.
Yeah.
So some other life changes, maybe it's a divorce, right? Maybe it's a death. And then you also have just job loss, like you mentioned earlier, that loss of income. And so those are kind of the main ones that I can think of. And then you just kind of have that careless living, right?
Yeah.
And just that can create an imbalance, because then that is a habitual behavior that is very difficult to change. And a lot of these, we can tell you what to do and how to do it, but it's sometimes breaking those bad behaviors that's the most challenging part.
Rachelle, you call it retail therapy.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And then I think we've mentioned it in a couple of the episodes now, but budgeting boils down to discipline.
Yeah.
And it boils down to just facing facts and actually coming to terms with the fact that maybe you have been careless, or maybe things, the life changes have happened and it's kind of caught you off guard, but you have to sit and reassess and let's re-examine the budget. And I think we've talked about that several times, that the budgeting process is just that. It's a process. You will rework it several times throughout your life because in Texas, we talk about feast or famine. We mentioned kind of off the air that we live in oil country. And so during times of feast, when the oil fields are doing really good, well, your income could be substantially higher during those times. And so you live a little bit better.
Right.
You do a few little extra things. But you've got to remember that just as there is a feast time, there's a famine time. And in those lean times, you have to be honest with yourself, be disciplined, look at the things that you've kind of allowed to get out of control and start to slim it back down.
Absolutely.
Because sometimes I don't think, yes, we understand a loss of income, but sometimes I think it's not so much even a loss of income. It's just the income you have doesn't stretch as far as it used to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we see that specifically in our current economy. It's things, who would have thought that toilet paper and eggs and just basic things that we use for living, gas, things to get to and from work would fluctuate so wildly in cost that from one week to the next, you can't plan your budget based off of these things. You have to make sure that you build an extra cushion just for some of these things that used to be predictable daily expenses.
Exactly. I was going to say, because if you're budgeting for your normal gas expense and then gas goes up 20%,
yeah,
like we've seen it fluctuate almost in a matter of just a month, go from, $2.93 to $3.38, that's a big swing.
Absolutely.
I went to work one day just absolutely complaining that the price of chili dogs, something that should be a very inexpensive quick meal, that you really can't feed 4 people for $20 because things like canned chili and hot dogs are so expensive. So even if you're planning the most minimum meal, it still can be a lot, and it can be a bust to your budget.
So how does this make us feel? When you're in that position and your income just doesn't go as far as it used to. I mean, there's a psychological impact here.
Absolutely. I mean, you can look at it, and what used to make sense doesn't make sense anymore. And so then you're starting to question, well, how are others doing it? How are others? And in reality, we may all be feeling that and asking the same questions. And so it's important, like you said, to reach out. But it's trying to change, and it's addressing it not as the budget, not a set it and forget it kind of budget, but it's a working budget, and finding other ways to spend that money but still meet the needs, and having that excess to put towards your goals.
Absolutely. We talked about it in the budgeting episode, that a budget should be more proactive instead of reactive.
Right.
Instead of looking back and wondering where we spent our money, we should be looking forward and planning how we spend our money. And then we should be continually revising, as you said, Rachelle.
Yes, and Blake has mentioned it in a previous episode. You've got to take the emotional factor out of it. And so when things come to you all of a sudden out of nowhere, unexpectedly, we're human, and so our first reaction a lot of times is that of emotion, either sorrow, depression, anger, because the things that you used to be able to do, you can't do. So the first thing you've got to do is face the situation. The second thing I think you need to do is take the emotional aspect away from it so that you can think rationally and logically, and then just see, okay, get creative. You may have to be creative. Maybe you start carpooling, or taking, the city transportation, or different things, maybe not going out during lunch. You bring your lunch to work so that you're not spending money, extra gas going back and forth. So there are all types of small tweaks that you can make to make adjustments to your already set budget.
Absolutely. So I know we talked a little bit about the priorities in our last episode when we talked about dealing with a crisis, and we talked about understanding that your priorities, list them out from highest priority to lowest priority. And in a crisis, you know you can cut from the bottom because you know it's not going to affect your life. It might hurt for a little period of time, or it might free up some money to get through an emergency. But sometimes when we're dealing with, careless living, maybe we just brought on too many things. We love the certain shows that are only available on certain streaming services, and we think that, well, it's only $9. It's not that much. It's not going to move the needle that much, so I'll just do it. Then we get the next one. Well, it's only $12. It's not going to move the needle that much. Then we get the next one. It's only $7. It's not going to move the needle that much. We do that so many different times so we can watch our shows, and it's just a comfort item. But then when that budget gets tight, we realize, wow, we're spending $45 on streaming services. Maybe that's just something we need to look at our budget and say, this isn't necessarily an issue of an emergency. This is an issue of realigning our priorities to realize that we have objectives. We have things we want to do with our future, and our future shouldn't be tied down by a streaming show. We should allow ourselves the freedom to put money into the future. If you want the streaming services, you can afford the streaming services, that's great. But if your budget is so tight, maybe the streaming services is something that we look at as a way to let go of, to free up, to make sure that our future goals, going on vacation, planning for retirement, saving for an emergency, those things are prioritized first.
And you use two key words, it's only.
Yeah.
And I think that gets us in trouble so much. Well, it's only, this amount. It's only this amount.
Right.
But as you just stated, it's only adds up quickly.
Yeah, it does.
And so you've got to take those it's onlys kind of away when you find yourself having too many bills and not enough money. Another good thing that I have found in my personal life is combining debt when you can.
Yeah.
So maybe you've got, just say 3 or 4 credit cards. Perhaps you can pay off the smaller ones and just have one bill that you're dealing with, that maybe for a while you can only make minimum payments. But if you're making a minimum payment to 1 credit card versus 3 credit cards until you can get yourself back on track, those are some little things that you can kind of help to, combine your debt, reduce your debt, look for ways where you can cut things and slim down the amount of payments you're making.
So I think that's a great transition into our next avenue of, dealing with too many bills and not enough money, is dealing with overwhelming debt loads. We're not now just talking about our electric bill, our rent, not talking about our mortgage. We're talking about the recurring debts or the fixed payments that we're spending money on, that like credit cards from different stores and stuff like that. A lot of times we get ourselves in such a rut because we feel as long as we can make the minimum payment, we're okay. I know I was that same way. I had 5 credit cards, and as long as I was able to make the minimum payments on all of them, they all got maxed out. But so I couldn't use them anymore, but they were still sitting there, and I still had to make these minimum payments, and nothing I was doing was making any progress to pay them off. It was because I didn't understand the process of setting up a plan to pay them off, smallest debt to largest debt, to see those little progresses. So what do we do when we're facing overwhelming debt loads?
Well, I think you have to, one, you're looking at it because that's taking up your income, right?
Yeah.
Those past purchases are taking up your future income, and you could be living in that where you're starting to look and wonder, like, hey, this balance was because of something in the past.
Yeah.
Am I still enjoying it? Like, is it still worth that cost, right? The way that I'm feeling, the position I'm in, like, because what I find out is a lot of people are excited when they get into debt because of what that debt's going to buy them, right? And they don't think about the reasons that imbalance when life happens, and they think, oh yeah, I'll be able to afford it, it'll be fine, and then life happens, right? Natural disaster, the job loss, the careless living, right? And those things happen, and now it's like, well, now I have more of a buyer's remorse than I did when I first signed the note. And so I think understanding those feelings, looking back on that and wondering, was that really worth it? And asking yourself those real questions, because maybe it is worth it.
Yeah.
Maybe it was a mortgage, right? And you're living in a house, right? That could be different than you racking up those credit cards for retail therapy, or racking up those credit cards for just recognizing there's an imbalance, but hopefully it's a season and I'll get through it. And you just find yourself stuck in this season that just seems to be life now.
Yeah.
And I think using those emotions to fuel your motivation to get out of it will help. Because then you'll say, well, what can I throw at this?
Yeah.
How can I get rid of some of those subscriptions that you talked about? How can I meal plan to spend less on money? How can I carpool to use that gas towards this and free up some of my income to pay for maybe a night out with my spouse, or maybe a night out at a restaurant instead of eating those chili dogs, right? And so I feel like, you can harness those emotions for positive goods, but not let the emotions control you.
Definitely.
Right?
Retail therapy, what I had to really learn the hard way was retail therapy can include window shopping and not actually purchasing. The thrill of actually going in the store and looking at things and trying them on, but then saying, well, let me go down to another store. 90% of the time, if I leave it and walk away, I don't want it as bad as I did when I first looked at it.
Yeah.
Another real trap that retail therapy happens is, oh, well, you can get 15% off today if you apply for the store credit card.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a huge trap that a lot of people get into, because they're thinking, oh, well, I just saved X amount of dollars by getting this card, but you don't realize now you've added a store card on top of your credit cards that you really didn't need. And so kind of like you said, taking those emotions, it's okay that I'm shopping out of emotion, but maybe I'm window shopping now instead of actually buying,
right,
so that later on, whatever I purchased, I don't have buyer's remorse later down the road.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the important things about buyer's remorse, is you're just saying, like, when you save up and pay cash for something, it just feels so much freer, because now you can have the memories, you can have the fun, you can enjoy whatever it was that you did without next month having a bill come tapping you on the shoulder and say, hey, remember that fun you just had? It's time to pay up. It's not fun whenever all of a sudden those bills start coming back and the memories start to fade. So when we're dealing with this mountain of debt, I mean, a lot of people, I think what I was going to say, Blake, when you were talking about that emotion of realizing that I need to get out of debt, a lot of times people don't realize how much pain they're in or how bad the situation is until they really start feeling the pain. Mm-hmm. And for our younger listeners out there, you may not feel the pain yet. You may just got your first credit card. You think it's building your credit, which it probably is. And that could help you in some areas of life. But if you're not properly managing that credit, then that credit can start to control you instead of you controlling it. And you start to spiral out of control until the point to where you get to the topic of today's discussion, where you have too many bills and not enough income to cover it. And so I think what's important here is to realize before you get to that point, start seeing the warning signs and start trying to fix it. But there's a lot of us that have already passed that point. A lot like me a few years ago when I was neck deep in debt, had no way out, didn't even understand how to properly manage a budget. There's no light at the end of that tunnel. It's a spiraling downward pattern that you don't know what to do next. So when we come back from our quick commercial break, we're going to discuss what we need to do if we're facing too much debt. How do we set up a plan to pay that off? How do we set up a plan to pay and save for our future? So we'll be right back.
Hello, I'm Karen Partee with the TBT Financial Minute. From job loss to medical expenses, life is full of the unexpected. Be prepared with an emergency cash fund. Save up enough money to cover 3 to 6 months of household expenses and put it in an accessible savings or money market account. Should a crisis occur, you'll be prepared. Learn more at texasbankandtrust.com. TBT Financial Minute is brought to you by Texas Bank and Trust.
Looking for a digital tool to manage your budget? Texas Bank and Trust online financial management tool, MyOFM, can let you see all of your financial accounts in one secure location, as well as set budget limits and expense trackers to help you stay focused on your goals. MyOFM can be located inside the TBT mobile banking platforms on a PC and mobile device. Learn more at texasbankandtrust.com.
And we're back. Welcome back to Between the T's. We're continuing our discussion with Blake Bradshaw and Rachelle Carter, going through what it means to be facing too many bills and not enough money to handle those bills. Right before we left for commercial, we were discussing some of the ways that our bills make us feel whenever we're overwhelmed with debt to where we don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. In fact, it doesn't even feel like a tunnel, it feels more like a cave, and there's no way out of this hole that we dug ourselves into. But today we're going to discuss what do we do when we're in that situation. We talked already about setting our emotions at the door, sitting down with a piece of paper, and evaluating our situation with clear eyes. So now we've looked at our situation, we see that we just have too many bills. We have too much debt, and not just our regular electric bill and stuff like that, but like our car payments. Maybe we have a car that we couldn't afford, but we bought it because it looked pretty, or we thought we could afford it at the time, and now we're stuck upside down in a payment that we can't afford, or too many streaming service or credit cards that we've maxed out because we went and did some retail therapy, and or we went on a vacation and did it on a credit card, and now all of those bills are now coming back and haunting us, and we don't know how we're going to get out of this mess that we dug ourselves into. You know, for those of us who are young coming out of college, those credit card offers are tempting. But if you don't properly manage it, it can overwhelm you so fast. So now let's discuss what do we do when we're facing that overwhelming debt load. We're going to discuss 2 different methods for paying off our debt. First method we're going to discuss is the snowball method. Blake, you and I have worked with a lot of people on this type of method before. Tell us a little bit about how that snowball method works.
Yeah, so the snowball method, you list your debts from your lowest balance to your highest balance. And what you'll do is if you found any discretionary spending that you were able to cut, you would put towards that low balance item until it was paid off. And then you take that discretionary spending plus the amount of the payment on that low balance and put it towards the next line item. And then it starts to snowball whenever you start paying off those debts because you're applying it all to the next debt. And then eventually you pay off that high balance would be the last item.
Definitely. Another method that we go through is called the avalanche method. Rachelle, do you know much about that one?
I hadn't heard of that one until we were discussing it off the air. So that one was a new one to me.
Yeah, it's one that I hadn't really heard about it either until I started looking into some research. Basically, the snowball, as Blake was saying, you list your debt smallest to largest and you pay that lowest one off first. The avalanche method is a little bit different, and mathematically, they say it can help you pay down your bills by paying less interest, because what you do is you put your bills, list them out by highest interest rate, regardless of balance, and then you pay any extra funds you have on the debt with the highest interest rate. And so what you do is you get a piece of paper and you write down all of your bills and you list them out by what the amount is, what your monthly payment is, and what your interest rate is on it. And you take them and you organize them by the highest interest rate and you pay that first one until you can get that one paid off. Then just like with a snowball, you take the amount that you were paying on that, the minimum payment plus whatever extra funds you had, and you apply that to the next highest interest rate and the next highest interest rate until you get down to your last bill and you pay them off. And mathematically, they say this pays off your debt with less money because you're knocking down those higher interest rate numbers first. The debt snowball method, on the other hand, it's a little psychological wins each time you pay something off, right, Blake?
That's right. That's right. And I've used that snowball method. And when you are overwhelmed with debt and you find more month than you have paycheck, those emotions are also overwhelming. And so you feel depressed. You feel like you're in your own grave. So that snowball method, with that small balance being paid off, it's like a small win. And there's something psychologically that goes off, and it's like hope starts to build. And you're like, okay, well, maybe there is a way out. Like we did it. You celebrate and you go on to the next one. And it's those little wins that help you get past that next month when you're sacrificing, whether it's through your retail therapy or you're sacrificing, the Bluebell ice cream or whatever you're sacrificing. That, hey, I was able to pay that off last month, and now this month we'll be able to pay this off, and so it's those little wins that help build that momentum.
Definitely.
And I guess I could see a benefit from both of them. Now, having heard the explanation for both, I guess I could kind of see where the avalanche method would be a good one, because typically whatever your highest interest payment is going to be your highest balance, and it's also going to be your highest payment. And so if we're knocking that one out first, then you've got more money perhaps to go towards, the next one on the list. But I also believe the snowball method, because I believe in those little victories.
Yeah.
I heard a saying once that, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Yeah.
And so I think when you're doing the snowball method, you get to see little by little that you actually can see it, I think, sooner. That, okay, 2 months ago I had 4 credit cards. Now I've got 3. And something, to that. And I think it kind of helps you to keep going.
Yeah.
You start saying, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can. And you start knocking them out. Oh, I know I can. I know I can. And so I think both methods are probably good. And again, it would be determined by what your personal financial situation is.
Yeah.
If you're making minimum wage, you don't have a very large income and very little discretionary money, I would think the snowball method with those small wins would probably be an easier approach.
Right.
But if you've got a little more income coming in and maybe your discretionary fund can handle it a little bit better, then I could see the benefit of the avalanche method. But like you said, a trained financial advisor who could really sit down and look at what your finances look like would be the best one to tell you which method to apply.
Definitely. So that is a very key thing here, is sitting down with an objective set of eyes. Sometimes I look at my money and I'm like, I just don't see it. I don't know how to get past my own understanding. But then I show it to someone else, and we sit down and we work through the numbers together. And all of a sudden things start to come a little more clear just from opening up and sharing with someone, just seeing that you're not alone. That's one thing that's so vital here, is remember that we're not alone in this. We've all experienced this. We've either experienced it now or we're going to experience it at some point. And we have to be well versed in how to handle this. And so knowing that you're not alone is vital here. But regarding the two methods, for me personally, the snowball rocked my world. When I first learned how to pay off my debt, I went from car payments, like $30-something thousand in student loans with very little income. I had no idea what I was going to do to pay this stuff off. But as you said, Rachelle, one bite at a time. I looked at all of my bills and I put any extra money I had, I'd put towards that smallest payment, which was like a $600 credit card. And I just knocked it off. $50 here, $20 there, $30 here. Anytime I had a little extra cash, I'd knock it off until all of a sudden that bill was gone. That freed up a $50 minimum monthly payment, plus the $40 I was throwing out. Now I have $80 that I'm going to add to the next bill. That win felt great in and of itself, but now I have $80 freed up. That's going to this next bill as $120. I was already paying $120 on it. Now I'm paying $200. it's going to knock that one down so much faster. When that's gone, now I have $200 freed up. So that snowball really starts mounting up so fast until by the time I was paying my last bill, which was my student loans, I had almost $1,000 a month. I had literally been nickel and diming, $30 here, $100 there, $50 there on minimum payments. That once I was on that last bill, almost $1,000 extra per month. It's mind-boggling to sit and think about it now. But once that last student loan payment was paid and I clicked that last pay button, guess what happened the next month? I had $1,500 sitting in my bank account with nobody's name on it.
Oh, yeah.
Guys, if you're listening to this program right now, that is the feeling that we're trying to get you to see. That light at the end of the tunnel. You might not see it right now. You might not feel it right now. But if you don't give up, the key to either of these, if you do the avalanche where you pay your highest interest rate first, or the snowball where you pay your lowest balance first, the key is discipline, and the key is to not give up and to look at that end result. What is it that you're trying to accomplish? And then what is it going to feel like when you get there? I tell you, it was the most freeing feeling I'd had in a long time.
Yeah. And, one thing that I've heard a lot of people say when they have an overwhelming amount of debt is they feel like they're working for their creditors. And they're not, I'm going to work every day, but I get no benefit from it.
Yeah.
Because they fail to realize, well, yeah, you actually got the benefit. You just actually already spent the benefit ahead of time.
Yeah.
So now when those bills are coming in month after month, they feel like they're working basically for free. And so when you get those little wins and all of a sudden, like you said, you look and you have $1,500, now suddenly you think, oh my goodness, look, this actually belongs to me. Yeah. So I think that's very important that you look at that and to have the discipline. And then one of the other things you said about bringing in an objective third party, because we've said it so many times, emotions are attached to it. Finances are a big stressor on relationships, on households, period, on how we conduct our everyday life, our finances and our freedom to do or to go, our emotions are tied up in it. And so sometimes we can't see clearly because we're so emotionally invested in it. And having that objective third party show us where we can make some cuts, things that we don't think that we can part with, that objective person can say, do you really need it? And it causes you to rethink your priorities to where you realize, okay, maybe I really don't need that. I just thought it's a want. I thought it was a need, but having them actually kind of say it back to you helps you realize, okay, no, that really was a want. It's not a need. And you just start making those slow progresses. And before you know it, you'll have more in less time than what you think it will take you.
Right. So, you kind of talked about that you try to find that extra spending, like we talked about in that financial triage episode. But what if you find that everything you're spending your money on, you cut it back as much as you could, and everything you're spending on is a need? Well, where do you find that extra to pay towards debt?
Well, and sometimes, like you said, everything on the list, actually, you don't have any frills. You really don't. And so sometimes, unfortunately, maybe it does mean that something has to go back. Maybe, unfortunately, the credit card has to be charged off because you have to just deal with just those four walls that you talked about, those absolute things that you have to have: shelter, food, sometimes some form of transportation. And so as painful as it is sometimes, the reality of when you've overextended yourself or your job has been cut, your income's been cut, sometimes you have to let things go. And it's okay.
Absolutely.
It doesn't make you a failure. It just means you have to begin again.
Yeah.
I think as we discussed in the financial triage, this is one of those places where we literally have to examine every penny. Sometimes looking at our budget and seeing, am I buying something that's a name brand that I could possibly get a store brand of that might save me a few bucks here and there? because that's literally what I did when I was trying to figure out how to pay off my debt. I went and I examined every little thing. Did I need a satellite subscription? Did I need a $120 a month phone plan when I found one for $30 a month? I looked at every penny that I spent, and it was with those thoughts in mind of what do I do if I needed $1,000 now? What am I going to do? That's one of those mentalities when you're trying to get out of debt. You should be fighting as if your life depends on it, because it very well might be, not your physical life in not many circumstances, but your financial life, your future. You're mortgaging away your future to live in the moment. And so let's look at what we can do to regain control of our financial lives.
Yeah. Well, your life could depend on it. If you put so much financial burden on your life that it could cause health issues, and could cost your life. So when does somebody know that they need to reach out for help? Like, at what point would you say, hey, this is the time you need to reach out for help? And what keeps somebody from asking for help?
I think for me, one of the things that should be a key indicator is if you find yourself having a lot of late charges, you simply can't pay your bills on time. And so whether they realize it or not, paying it late, now you're adding extra debt to an already overwhelming debt, because now you're paying, late charges. You're paying, sometimes they increase your finance charges because you pay late. And so you end up with those type of things. And then I think also from an emotional standpoint, you've got to cut it so that you can realize I've got to take this stressor out because it affects, like you said, your health. It affects your relationship. Oftentimes it is one of the biggest stressors on a marriage because now all we're communicating about or really fighting and arguing about is money and a lack of money.
Yeah.
And so you've got to look at all of those key indicators and realize those pain points that we talked about.
There's definitely there may come a time whenever your finances literally are stretched so thin, and it might come to an income issue. Maybe the job that you're in isn't providing enough income for your family, so you're doing some sort of side hustle or some sort of vocational training to where you can go get a better job. Sometimes that is the solution. It might just be that you are in a income shortage that we need to evaluate that as well. When debt or bills aren't the equation anymore, then maybe income is the issue. But I think one of the most important things to do, as we've talked numerous times, is to sit down with someone objectively. Whether it's a close friend that you trust, someone at your church, or someone that you know that may have a similar passion for wanting to get out of debt, or you've seen them succeed at it. It's great to talk to someone who's been there, who's done that, and has succeeded, and ask them what they did. And then maybe get them to look at your numbers and get them to give you some practical advice that maybe you didn't see yourself.
Yeah. Well, asking for help is a very humbling thing to do. And so, you are facing your insecurities. You are bringing that all out to light, and to bear that before someone it has to be difficult, but you also have to weigh, am I willing to be uncomfortable for a moment in order to be comfortable later on?
Yeah.
And so I think you have to weigh those things, because we aren't self-sufficient.
Yeah.
We can't make that money on our own. And there because you are in that situation, there's probably some behavioral issues that you have to address. I'm reading a parenting book, and it talked about how we can put that behavior in our own children, such as when a kid gets hurt, what is the number one item that we try to give them to get over their hurt? Say say that it's a scratch or something. For me right now, with it being so hot outside, it's a popsicle, right? Put a popsicle on it, right? And then you get to enjoy the popsicle after. Well, what we're feeding the behavior there is that whenever you're hurt, you eat.
Yeah.
Right. And so now when you get older, when you're hurt or during the day, I now go to a half gallon of Bluebell ice cream. Right. And so it carries over into our adult life. And so there could be so many things that have happened as a child that have become behaviors as an adult that we just don't recognize or realize until you sit down and you just talk it out with a financial professional.
Definitely.
And I think the other part too is finances is so very personal. Mm-hmm. It's almost like when you go to the doctor every year for an annual well checkup. That is a very uncomfortable situation for most of us.
Yeah.
But we realize that our health depends on it. And so we make those annual visits. As much as we despise doing them, we realize how important they are. Insurance companies realize how important they are. And that's why most of the time, preventative care is covered at 100% by insurance companies, because they realize if you go ahead and stay on top of it, maybe it will prevent something greater down the road. And I think if we can help our listeners to understand, our finances need to be examined the same way. If we annually take a well check of our finances, look at maybe what's out of sync. Maybe we've got some inconsistencies, or we've got some imbalances. But if we would re-examine it at least annually, if not more often, it will help prepare us for the long run. One of the things that I like to always talk about, one of the scriptures that sticks in my mind, is that we are to leave an inheritance for our children's children.
Yeah.
You can only leave an inheritance for your children's children if you are handling your finances now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the things when we are dealing with our finances as well is there may come a point whenever it feels like that we've tried everything, we don't know what to do. There is also the option, a lot of people don't like to discuss it, but it's bankruptcy. And that's one of those things that a lot of people think that it's an easy way out, but it's not. It's not a quick fix. It's not an easy way out. It can damage your credit and damage your life for quite a while. But some people, that may be where you end up being. But this is where we say sitting down and talking with someone about your finances, sitting down talking to a banker, to a tax attorney, if you're at that level where you're thinking that you might need to file bankruptcy, sitting down and talking with someone who knows the law, knows the ins and outs of your situation, they can give you some practical advice. That's something we can't do on a podcast, but it's one of those things that we highly encourage you to do, just to, if you feel like you've evaluated every option, before you throw in the towel for bankruptcy, sit down and talk to someone, because there may be a perspective that you hadn't thought of, that someone can show you and show you a way out that you hadn't considered.
That's right.
That's right.
Any last thoughts you guys have for our audience?
I think for me, the biggest thing would be, and we've said it repeatedly, know that you're not alone. All of us have been there at one point or another. You can be sitting high today and low tomorrow because life happens. And I think the other thing is take the emotions out of it as best you can, face it, and be disciplined.
Yeah, love it.
And that is all the time that we have for this edition of Between the T's. I'd like to thank my co-host, Blake Bradshaw, and our guest, Rachelle Carter, for joining me for this insightful conversation about dealing with difficult financial times. I hope this information has been useful to you as you take on your personal financial journey. Please consider liking and sharing our content with others who may benefit from the show. As we enter the new year, we will begin with a discussion about the myth of social status and the dangers of buying things just to keep up with the Joneses, or as we in Texas like to call it, having a big hat and no cattle. This has been a production of TBT Studios and Texas Bank and Trust, member FDIC, equal housing lender. If you live in one of Texas Bank and Trust markets, we'd love to be your bank, but if not, we hope that this information is helpful to you no matter where you live. And remember that knowledge is always power when it is shared between the T's. Thank you for joining us.